uninitiated, and I guess that would be, well, maybe that's everybody.
Pretty much everybody.
Who is Ida C. Craddock, and why is she important?
Sure. Well, let's see. I mean, as the subtitle says, Ida Craddock was a mystic, a scholar, civil liberties martyr, a sexologist, a madwoman. And she's significant, or at least fascinating, in all of those roles. As a scholar, as a would-be scholar, I mean, at least. She's the first woman admitted to Penn College of Liberal Arts, though then the bar against women is reaffirmed. So she's ultimately not admitted. So that means that any of her intellectual ambitions are always taking place on the edges.
Mm-hmm. So that's sort of amateur kind of.
Yeah, as an amateur. So, and since she takes her intellectual work fairly seriously and writes up any number of manuscripts in the study of religion, she's an interesting case of what happens to the amateur intellectual in a world of increasing professionalization, particularly how professionalization works in gendered ways. So that there's a whole cadre of amateur scholars of religion who are women in these decades, all of them advancing a kind of critical take on the patriarchal qualities of religion, and all of them are in fact marginalized through professionalization. So she becomes an interesting lens on that phenomenon and what is the impact of this PhD octopus on amateur scholarship. So that's one thing that I think makes her interesting. Another is her role as a sexologist. I mean, this sense that she wants to be frank and candid about subjects that most people would rather have you not be frank and candid about. So she's breaking through that kind of hush-hush sense of modesty that is very much a part of her world, and writing up these manuals of sexual advice for married couples.
When is her first foray into that? I mean,
first 1893-94 is really when she first comes out as a sex reformer, sex radical, or marriage reformer, however you want to do it. And I mean, it starts, and this is actually where I start the book, with this very unusual episode around the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, where on the Midway there are any number of entertainments, any number of kind of circus acts on the Midway. And one of them is belly dancing, which is, there's a show in the Egyptian theater. Actually, there are other dancers there too, but the Egyptian theater seems to be the focus of much of the controversy, in that there's a number of dancers who are belly dancing, and this becomes quite a sensation, quite a scandal. And a lot of people think the whole show should be shut down, that it's just too libidinous to tolerate, and that in a civilized Christian country this kind of thing can't go on, so we should shut it down. On the other hand, there's a lot of tourist interest in it, and it's making the promoters money, so they ultimately keep the show going, despite the fact that there's quite a bit of opposition, including from Anthony Comstock and the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. Craddock gets her debut as a sex radical in the midst of that controversy, because she comes out in support of the Egyptian dancers and belly dancing, and how this is actually a venerable tradition, and it can teach us much about the relationship between spirit and body, and can be a good educator for the married, and that this was, it's a good indication of female passion rather than just passionlessness. So she has various ways she wants to defend it. And that becomes her place, her entry in, and then within about the next year or two, she starts writing little manuals along that lines, and all of which are eventually and sooner rather than later in most cases, deemed obscene and declared to be unmailable under the Comstock Act. And because she nonetheless keeps mailing them and circulating them, she's arrested several times. So that's that's the beginning point for her, and that involves then, of course, her role as a sexologist, and then also this kind of side of her as a promoter of civil liberties, and this way in which she becomes a kind of martyr for the cause of free speech and free religious expression and so on.
She's so, reading the book, I get this feeling that, I mean, obviously she's so unusual in her day.
Right.
And I guess for you as a historian, taking a character who is so out of the ordinary, but then telling the bigger story about society, I found that really fascinating. Mm-hmm. How you're trying to both narrate the story of her life, which is very strange, on the fringes in a lot of ways, but also tied into the certain traditions of the day, and tied into a whole sort of realm of Victorian thought. And
right. Yeah, I think that is one of the difficult things. I mean, I didn't want it to be a typical biography, whatever that means. I mean, I definitely didn't want it to simply move, from her immediate forebears through her birth and upbringing on through, chapter by chapter, year by year to her untimely death in 1902. That isn't what I wanted to do. I mean, I really wanted to think about her life in terms of important themes within the culture. So I saw it more as a cultural biography, as a life that illumines these important conflicts within the period. Mm-hmm. And the very extremity of her life, the very oddity of her life, then became a useful way of illuminating the conflicts. So that's how I thought about it. I really didn't want it to be a work in a strictly biographical vein. I was always trying to work against that grain. I mean, it's not that I didn't want to tell the story. I wanted to get the story right. Nobody's ever told a story. Nobody's ever pieced her life together quite like this. No one's gone through and just and done this. So I wanted to do that, but I wanted to do it in the service of these larger historical themes and getting a bigger picture on the culture. So that's what I constantly try to do, tack back and forth between getting all the little pieces together and getting to know as much as I could about her life in detail, and then moving back to these bigger themes. I mean, whether it's the civil liberties issues, the religious freedom issues. I mean, the other big issue she speaks to is the kind of religion and psychology issues in her day. I mean, is she insane or isn't she insane? I mean, can she simply be categorized within medical psychological categories of the day, like an erotomaniac, or an nymphomaniac, or one kind of neurastheniac or another, or not? Or was she kind of crazy smart in a way, and then had was saying something else, that it was her very craziness that enabled her to say things that others would not have dared to say. So she became a fascinating lens on the way people thought about religion and psychology in the period too. So it was that kind of sense. Let's move in, let's move out, so that was what I was trying to do.